have you seen Star Wars?
There's a lot of guys like me in the world who listen to the Joe Rogan podcast. It's a very popular podcast. I think it's the most popular podcast in the world, and probably will be for the foreseeable future. But one thing we were all looking forward to was Kanye West appearing on the podcast. It's been like a year or two that we've been waiting on it, that he said he would do it, and he finally did it. But one thing that surprised us all, mainly in the Star Wars community, is that in this 1.5 hour, I think it was, podcast, this length, Kanye West talked about the Star Wars prequels and Star Wars in general, and I was actually very impressed with the insight that him and Joe Rogan had. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
It's almost like you were talking about the Disney Star Wars movies, that then it's not a work of art. It's a formula. Like 2 + 2 is 4. Let's put those together. We'll make some money. Instead of the original Star Wars, which was the hero's journey, which was like a Joseph Campbell book. It's like there was a beauty and a purity to it. It's an expression. Like someone comes up with an idea and they bring it to fruition, and then you get to watch and you're like, wow, it moves you. The new movies don't move you.
They said that George Lucas's prequels are worse than the corporate-made Disney Star Wars.
I'll get mad at that too.
Like
that's fucking ridiculous.
Revenge of the Sith. We saw how Darth Vader was made.
Yeah.
Like I watched that like 10 times during COVID. Like, don't jump, Anakin. No. I got the high ground.
Those early movies were pure.
This is George. This is his baby. That thing was set in his heart to show us as children the hero's journey.
And I actually think that both of them make very good points. And like I said, I was a little surprised with the insight that even Kanye had when he talks about Brian De Palma being the influence for George to have the opening crawl for Star Wars, which back in 1977, nothing like that had ever been done before. And that really surprised the audience, and that kind of drew everyone in. And I think both of them make good points on how when Disney makes Star Wars films, and I'm not trying to harp on anyone who likes the sequel films, but there is a different structure when it comes to making the Star Wars films from Disney than the Star Wars films from Lucas. And that is, when Lucas was making the original trilogy, mainly the original trilogy, is that it was a passion project. It was something that him and a bunch of people he collaborated with all were doing it for the sake of story. And then when it came to the prequels in 1999, 2002, 2005, George was able to actually use the technology that has evolved a lot in those 22 years that he took off from directing. He used the modern technology to tell the story the way he originally wanted to tell it in 1977. He was very big on vision in the future and kind of being a revolutionary person in the film industry. I mean, he's revolutionized the film industry 2 or 3 times, and that's doing it once is a big deal, but being someone who makes a pattern of it is also huge. So when it came to the prequels, despite people's criticisms on the story, it still was the vision of George Lucas, the way he wanted to tell the story. In his mind, the story of Anakin Skywalker was complete, and he wanted to continue that story with the Star Wars sequels. 7, 8, and 9 gave the story treatments to Disney, and that was his way of passing on the mantle, passing on the torch of Star Wars, but continuing to tell that story. But then Disney decided to take the story treatments and go a different route, maybe use a little bit of them, but never really use the core of that story and make their sequel films. And there's a lot of fans of the sequel trilogy, but there are a lot of people like me and like other Star Wars fans out there who look at the sequels, and even casual audiences look at the sequels and say, this doesn't feel like the core of Star Wars. Like Joe Rogan was saying, it's lacking that beauty to it. It feels like it was made by a corporation just trying to max out profits. And it's understandable. When you make a movie, the goal is to make money. But the first goal should always and fundamentally be to tell a story. And even when it came to The Force Awakens, I remember leading up to it, Lucas said something like, the fans are really going to love it. Instead of saying that he loved it, instead of saying that, oh, this is a really great story, he said the fans are going to love it, because that was the goal of Disney. And this was revealed in Bob Iger's book, serving as, I think it was 15 odd years as Disney CEO. He was saying that the goal for The Force Awakens, and he was saying this in response to criticism by George Lucas, that George was criticizing Disney for the very thing that they were trying to do, which was captivize the audience again with a familiar feeling Star Wars story. The Force Awakens felt very similar to the original trilogy, and that's because it copied a lot of those story structures, and someone like me doesn't have a problem with that. I understand trying to reboot the franchise and trying to give that sense of Star Wars feeling to a new audience, to a younger generation and the older generation, but when it comes to actually quality storytelling, when it comes to actually just telling the story because it's a story that you deem needs to be told, Disney did not do that. And that's okay if you like The Force Awakens, it's okay if you like The Last Jedi, it's okay if you like The Rise of Skywalker, but it's also kind of funny that you look at someone like Kanye West who, I may not be the biggest fan of his music and what he says, but there's a lot of people who love this guy, and he's become a very big culture figure. Even he can look at the Star Wars prequels and say something like, this was the vision for the creator. This wasn't a corporate structure film. This was something by an independent filmmaker with his own production company, and as an artist, I can understand why Kanye West would probably respect Lucas a lot more for making the Star Wars prequels, seeing the fall of Darth Vader, like he said, seeing Anakin become Darth Vader. And it's also funny that in Kanye West, one of his new songs, he says something like, Anakin, don't jump, I have the high ground. I mean, it's really ironic and funny that one of the big reasons the prequels have grown in popularity over the past 15 years since they wrapped up is that the memes have really taken the internet by storm, and something like I have the high ground is probably the biggest Star Wars meme to date. I mean, that is just such a common thing that you would see on the internet with any meme, even if it's Star Wars community memes, anything else you see, there's going to be a lot of memes about having the high ground, and it's even reaching people like Kanye West, and it's kind of reflective to show that two guys like Joe Rogan and Kanye West, two very, very popular people in the, I guess, American industry and across the world. I would argue they're in the top 100 celebrities in terms of fame in America. Even these two people realize that something like Disney Star Wars is a little bit more corporate structured and focused on making the money instead of focused on telling that story. And it reflected in reviews, it reflected in the box office. I was wrong on my prediction for The Rise of Skywalker that it would do $1.5 billion in the box office, because history shows with the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, the second film does worst out of every trilogy, but the third one does the second best. That's because the first film in every new trilogy, The Phantom Menace, New Hope, Force Awakens, that's kind of the Star Wars is here, Star Wars is back movie. But the third one is the one that everyone goes see because it's the finale to that story. And surprisingly, Rise of Skywalker broke history, I guess, and it broke the pattern that we had with the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. It defied history in terms of not being the second highest grossing film out of the new trilogy. It was third. I think it came a little under Last Jedi. I think it just almost beat Rogue One, which is not even an episodic film, and if you look at box office numbers and adjust for inflation, it is one of the lowest grossing films in the Star Wars universe and for the franchise, and I think that's because a lot of Star Wars fans and mainly casual audiences realize this isn't the Star Wars that they expected, but it's also not the Star Wars that they wanted. It's not the magic touch that someone like George Lucas has, where he goes into this, he wants to tell a story that he set out in 1975 when he started writing the script for Star Wars, but also it didn't revolutionize the film industry for a third time. And it's hard to do anything when it comes to revolutionizing anything, any industry. Doing that 2 or 3 times is a big deal, but Lucas going in for a third trilogy, you know that he would want to do something new. The new trilogy felt very similar to the original trilogy, for better or worse. It just felt like a repeat of that story, and I think a lot of people caught on to that. I think a lot of people felt, despite Disney's attempts, that this was a very Disney-fied trilogy. And as I said earlier, it's okay to like these films. There are good parts of these films for sure, and there are good parts and bad parts to the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. But what you cannot say about the sequels is that it is part of the Lucas story. And as someone who's a big Lucas fan and not actually being a big fan of the prequels, I can still respect the man as a storyteller. And someone like Kanye West, who is an artist, is of course going to respect Lucas as a storyteller because he's probably one of the best storytellers of our modern age and of the 20th century. And it's very integral to follow that man's vision when it comes to filmmaking, because even if he needs collaboration, even if he needs help when it comes to directing or writing dialogue, his story ideas are so amazing that they don't have to be followed, but if you want to actually tell a good story that really resonates with an audience, I think they should be followed. Look at Indiana Jones, look at American Graffiti, look at Star Wars. All 3 of these films, all 3 of these franchises, at their time, did a lot for the culture and did a lot for audiences going in. 1974, I think it was, when American Graffiti came out, that was a big deal for people who grew up in the 60s. Not a big deal to us nowadays. It's kind of lost touch with audiences. But that's because at the time, it was such a big nostalgia fest for those kids who grew up in the 60s, who went out cruising in Modesto, California, like George Lucas. So it really resonated with that audience, with the music. And Star Wars did the same thing. It brought out the inner child in all of us. It brought out the innocence of childhood. The prequels did the same for a lot of us. Kids like me, I grew up with the prequels, and I grew out of them, but it still is the reason I got involved with Star Wars. It still did its job of making me a Star Wars fan. Will the same happen with the sequel trilogy? Maybe, But I would argue even if it does resonate with a lot of kids, it may not resonate with as many kids due to a corporate structure by Disney, and also due to the fact that maybe there's other films out there that just do better with children like Marvel, and that's sad to say because that means Star Wars is no longer the #1 franchise anymore, and that's a far cry from what it used to be when it came to even the prequels and mainly the original trilogy. So tell me your thoughts below. What do you guys think about what Joe Rogan and mainly Kanye West had to say about liking the prequel trilogy more than the sequel trilogy, and do you think they're right about what they said? Comment your thoughts below. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe because it does about the channel. I'm Star Wars Only. I'll see you all next time, and may the Force be with you always.